Chapter 21 of Afloat on the Ohio. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Timothy Liveright. Chapter 21, The Cumberland and the Tennessee, Stately Solitudes, Old Fort Massac, Dead Towns in Egypt, The Last Camp, Cairo. Opposite Metropolis, Illinois, Saturday, June 9th. As we were dressing this morning at 5:30, the echoes were again awakened by the vociferous Negro on the Kentucky shore, who was going out to his work again, as noisy as ever. One of our own black men walked down the bank, ostensibly to light his pipe at the breakfast fire, but really to satisfy a pardonable curiosity regarding us. The singing brother on the mainland appeared to amuse him, and he paused to listen, saying, "Dat yere nigger, he got too loud voice." Then, when he had left our camp and regained the top of the bank, he leaned upon his hoe and yelled, "Say, nigger over there, where you get that mule?" "Who you hollerin' at, you Brack Island nigger?" was the quick reply. "You land nigger, you think you smart?" "I's so smart, I don't want no livin' on island with gang boss, and not 'lowed go way." The tuneful darky had evidently here touched a tender spot, for our man turned back into the field to his work, and the other, kicking the mule into action, trotted off to the tune of "There's a meeting here tonight." We went up into the field to see the laborers cultivating corn. The sun was blazing hot, without a breath of air stirring, but the great black fellows seemed to mind it not, chattering away to themselves like magpies, and keeping up their conversation by shouts when separated from each other at the ends of plow rows. A natural levee, 8 and 10 feet high, and studded with large tree willows, rims in the island farm like the edge of a basin. We were told that this served as a barrier only against the June fresh, for the regular spring floods invariably swamp the place. But what is left within the bowl, when the outer waters subside, soon leaches through the sandy soil. After passing the pretty shores of Dog Island, not far below, the bold, dark headland of Cumberland Island soon bursts upon our view. We follow the narrow eastern channel in order to greet the Cumberland River, 909 miles, which halfway down its island namesake, at the woe-begone little village of Smithland, Kentucky, empties a generous flood into the Ohio. The Cumberland, perhaps a quarter of a mile wide, debouches through high clay banks, which might readily be melted in the turbulent cross currents produced by the mingling of the rivers. But to avoid this, the government engineers have built a wing dam running out from the foot of the Cumberland, nearly halfway into the main river. This quickly unites the two streams, and the reinforced Ohio is therefore perceptibly widened. Tramp steamers are numerous on these lower reaches. We have seen perhaps a dozen such today, stopping at the farm landings, as well as at the crude and infrequent hamlets, mere notches of settlement in the wooded lines of shore, doing a small business in chance cargoes and in passengers who flag them from the bank. A sultry atmosphere has been with us through the day. The glassy surface of the river has, when not lashed into foam by passing boats, dazzled the eyes most painfully. The hills from below Stewart's Island have receded on either side, generally leaving either low, broad, heavily timbered bottoms, or high clay banks which stretch back wide plains of yellow and gray cornland, frequently inundated, but highly productive. Now and then the encroaching river has remained too long in some belt of forest, and we have great clumps of dead trees which spring aloft in stately picturesqueness, thickly clad the limb tips with Virginia creeper. A bit of shaly hillside occasionally abuts upon the river, though less frequently than above. And often such a spur has lying at its feet a row of half-immersed boulders delicately carpeted with mosses and with clinging vines. The Tennessee River, 918 miles, the largest of the Ohio's tributaries, is, where it enters, about half the width of the latter. Coming down through a broad, forested bottom with several pretty islands off its mouth, it presents a pleasing picture. Here again the government has been obliged to put in costly works to stop the ravages of the mingling torrents in the soft alluvial banks. The Ohio, with the united waters of the Cumberland and the Tennessee, henceforth flows majestically to the Mississippi, a full mile wide between her shores. Paducah, 13,000 inhabitants, next to Louisville, Kentucky's most important river port, lies on a high plain just below the Tennessee. It is a stirring little city, with the usual large proportion of Negroes and the outdoor business life everywhere met with in the South. Sawmills, iron plants, and shipyards line the bank. At the wharf are large steamers doing a considerable business up the Cumberland and Tennessee, and between Paducah and Cairo and St. Louis. There is a considerable ferry business to and from the Illinois suburb of Brooklyn. 7 miles below the Tennessee, on the Illinois side, we sought relief from the blazing sun within the mouth of 7 Mile Creek, which is cut deep through sloping banks of mud and overhung by great sprawling sycamores. These always interest us from the generosity of their height and girth, and from their great variety of color tones, induced by the patchy scaling of the bark, soft grays, buffs, greens, and ivory whites prevailing. When sufficiently refreshed in this cool bower, we ventured once more into the fierce light of the open river, and 2 miles below shot into the broader and more inviting Massac Creek, 928 miles, just as, of old, George Rogers Clark did with his little flotilla when en route to capture Kaskaskia. Clark, in his journal written long after the event, said that this creek is a mile above Fort Massac. His memory failed him. As a matter of fact, the steep, low hill of iron-stained gravel and clay, on which the old stronghold was built, is but 200 yards below. Footnote A. The French commander who, in October 1758, evacuated and burned Fort Duquesne on the approach of the English army under General Forbes, dropped down the Ohio for nearly 1,000 miles and built, "a fort on the beautiful eminence on the north bank of the river." But there was a fortified post on this hillock at a much earlier date, about 1711, erected as a headquarters for missionaries and to guard French fur traders from marauding Cherokees, and Pownall's map notes one here in 1751. This fort of 1758 was but an enlarged edition of the old. The new stronghold, with a garrison of 100 men, was the last built by the French upon the Ohio, and it was occupied by them until they evacuated the country in 1763. England does not appear to have made any attempt to repair and occupy the works then destroyed by the French, although urged to do so by her military agents in the West. Had they held Fort Massac, no doubt Clark's expedition to capture the Northwest for the Americans might easily have been nipped in the bud. As it was, the old fortress was a ruin when he reposed on the banks of the creek at its feet. When in 1793 to 1794 the French agent Genet was fomenting his scheme for capturing Louisiana and Florida from Spain by the aid of Western filibusters, old Fort Massac was thought of as a rallying point and a base of supplies. But St. Clair's proclamation of March 24, 1794, ordering General Wayne to restore and garrison the place for the purpose of preventing the proposed expedition from passing down the river, ended the conspiracy, and Genet left the country. A year later, Spain, who had at intervals sought to detach the Westerners from the Union and ally them with her interests beyond the Mississippi, renewed her attempts at corrupting the Kentuckians, and gained to her cause no less a man than George Rogers Clark himself. Among other designs, Fort Massac was to be captured by the adventurers, whom Spain was to supply with the sinews of war. There was much mysterious correspondence between the latter's corruption agent, Thomas Power, and the American General Wilkinson at Detroit, but finally Power, in disguise, was sent out of the country under guard by way of Fort Massac, and his escape into Spanish territory practically ended this interesting episode in Western history. The fort was occupied as a military post by our government until the close of the War of 1812 to 1815. What we see today are the ruins of the establishment then abandoned. No doubt the face of this rugged promontory of gravel has within a century suffered much from floods, but the remains of the earthwork on the crest of the cliff, some 50 feet above the present river stage, are still easily traceable throughout. The fort was about 40 yards square, with a bastion at each corner. There are the remains of an unstoned well near the center. The ditch surrounding the earthwork is still some 2½ or 3 feet below the surrounding level, and the breastwork about 2 feet above the inner level. No doubt palisades once surmounted the work, and were relied upon as the chief protection from assault. The grounds, a pleasant grassy grove several acres in extent, are now enclosed by a rail fence, and neatly maintained as a public park by the little city of Metropolis, which lies not far below. It was a commanding view of land and river, which was enjoyed by the garrison of old Fort Massac. Upstream there is a straight stretch of 11 miles to the mouth of the Tennessee. Both up and down, the shore lines are under full survey until they melt away in the distance. No enemy could well surprise the holders of this key to the lower Ohio. Our camp is on the sandy beach opposite Metropolis and 200 yards below the Kentucky end of the ferry. Behind us lies a deep forest with sycamores 6 and 8 feet in diameter, a country road curving off through the woods to the sparse rustic settlement lying some 2 miles in the interior, on higher ground than this wooded bottom, which is annually overflowed. Now and then the blustering little steam ferry comes across to land Kentucky farm folk and their mules going home from a Saturday's shopping in Metropolis. Occasionally a fisherman passes, lagging on his oars to scan us and our quarters, and from one of them we purchased a fish. As the still, cool night crept on, Metropolis was astir. Across the mile of intervening water darted tremulous shafts of light. We heard voices singing and laughing, a fiddle in its highest notes, the puffing of a stationary engine, and the bay and yelp of countless dogs. Later, a packet swooped down with smothered roar and threw its electric searchlight on the city wharf, revealing a crowd of negroes gathered there, like moths in the radiance of a candle. There were gay shouts and a mad scampering. We could see it all as plainly as if in ordinary light had been but a third of the distance. And then the roustabouts struck up a weird song as they ran out the gangplank, and, laden with boxes and bales, began swarming ashore like a procession of black ants carrying pupa cases. Mound City Towhead, Sunday, 10th. During the night, burglarious pigs would have raided our larder, but the crash of a falling kettle wakened us suddenly, as did geese the ancient Romans. The doctor and I sallied forth in our pajamas, with clods of clay in hand, to send the enemy flying back into the forest, snorting and squealing with baffled rage. We were afloat at 7:30, under an unclouded sky, with the sun sharply reflected from the smooth surface of the river, and the temperature rapidly mounting. The Fort Massac Ridge extends downstream as far as Mound City, but soon degenerates into a ridge of clay varying in height from 25 to 50 feet above the water level. Upon the low-lying bottom of the Kentucky shore is still an interminable dark line of forest. The settlements are meager and now wholly in Illinois. For instance, Joppa, 936 miles, a row of a half-dozen unpainted, dilapidated buildings, chiefly stores and abandoned warehouses, bespeaking a river traffic of the olden time that has gone to decay. A hot, dreary baking spot, this Joppa, as it lies sprawling upon the clay ridge, flanked by a low, wide gravel beach on which gaunt, Bell-ringing cows are wandering, eating the leaves of fallen trees for lack of better pasturage. Our pilot map of 60 years ago records the presence of Wilkinsonville, 942 miles, on the site of old Fort Wilkinson of the War of 1812-15, but no one along the banks appears to have ever heard of it. However, after much searching, we found the place for ourselves on an eminence of 50 feet, with 2 or 3 farmhouses as the sole relics of the old establishment. Caledonia, Olmsted Post Office, 9 miles down, consists of several large buildings on a hill set well back from the river. Mound City, 959 miles, the America of our time-warm map, in whose outskirts we are camped tonight, is a busy town with furniture factories, lumber mills, shipyards, and a railway transfer. Below that stretches the vast extent of swamp and low woodland on which Cairo, 967 miles, has with infinite pains been built, like, "brave little Holland," holding her own against the flood solely by virtue of her encircling dike. Houseboats have been few to-day, and they of the shanty order, and generally stranded high upon the beach. One sees now and then on the Illinois ridge the cheap log or frame house of a cracker, the very picture of desolate despair. But on the Kentucky shore are few signs of life, for the bottom lies so low that it is frequently inundated, and settlement ventures no nearer than 2 or 3 miles from the riverside. A fisherman comes occasionally into view upon this wide expanse of wood and water, and clay banks. Sometimes we hail him in passing, always getting a respectful answer, but a stare of innocent curiosity. Our last home upon the Ohio is facing the Kentucky shore on the cleanly sand beach of Mound City Towhead, a small island which in times of high water is but a bar. The tent is screened in a willow clump. Just below us, on higher ground, sycamores soar heavenward, gaily festooned with vines, hiding from us Mound City and the Illinois mainland. Across the river, a Kentucky negro is singing in the gloaming, but it is over a mile away, and while the tune is playing, the words are lost. Children's voices and the bay of hounds come wafted to us from the northern shore. A steamer's wake rolls along our island strand, dangerously near the campfire. The river is still falling, however, and we no longer fear the encroachments of the flood. The doctor and I found a secluded nook, where, in the moonlight, we took our final plunge. It is sad, this bidding good-bye to the stream which has floated us so merrily for 1,000 miles from the mountains down to the plain. We elders linger long by the last campfire to talk in fond reminiscence of the 6 weeks afloat, while the boy, no doubt, dreams peacefully of houseboats and fishermen, of gigantic bridges and flashing steel plants, of coal mines and oil wells, of pioneers and Indians, and all that, of 6 weeks of kaleidoscopic sensations, at an age when the mind is keenly active, and the heart open to impressions which can never be dimmed so long as his little life shall last. Cairo, Monday, 11th. At our island camp last night, we were but 9 miles from the mouth of the Ohio, a distance which could easily have been made before sundown, but we preferred to reach our destination in the morning, the better to arrange for railway transportation, hence our agreeable pause upon the towhead. Before embarking for the last run this morning, we made a neat heap on the beach of such of our stores, edible and wearable, as had been requisite to the trip, but were not worth the cost of sending home. Feeling confident that some passing fisherman would soon be tempted ashore to inspect this curious landmark, and yet might be troubled by nice scruples as to the policy of appropriating the find, we conspicuously labeled it, "Abandoned by the owners, the finder is welcome to the lot." Quickly passing Mound City, now bustling with life, Pilgrim closely skirted the monotonous clay banks of Illinois, swept rapidly under the monster railway bridge which stalks high above the flood, and loses itself over the tree-tops of the Kentucky bottom, and at 8:15 was pulled up at Cairo, with the Mississippi in plain sight over there, through the opening in the forest. In another hour or two she will be housed in a box-car, and we, her crew, having again donned the garb of landsmen, will be speeding toward our northern home, this pilgrimage but a memory. Such a memory! As we dropped below the towhead, the boy, for once silent, wistfully gazed astern. When at last Pilgrim had been hauled upon the railway levee, and the doctor and I had gone to summon the shipping clerk, the lad looked pleading into W.'s face. In tones half choked with tears, he expressed the sentiment of all. "Mother, is it really ended? Why can't we go back to Brownsville and do it all over again?" Footnote A. In the evening of the same day, I ran my boats into a small creek about 1 mile above the old Fort Missack, reposed ourselves for the night, and in the morning took a route to the northwest. Clark's letter to Mason. End chapter 21.